It's home all day. Okay, here we go. Let's get started. All right. So again, today's presentation is focused on the topic of help needed, when to seek support for your child. And as I stated myself, my name is Janet Fleck Griffiths. I will be presenting today with our special guest, Kristen Hildebrandt from Disability Rights Ohio. We're really lucky to have her. And just to, again, our education team consists of Frank Hickman and Mary Jo O'Neill. So the reason why I wanted to touch on this topic is I believe when I am working with parents, whether it's professionally or personally, the parents that I come across at my children's schools, friends of the family, etc., there's often this conversation you have at some point in your parenting where you're wondering, like, do I need to go out and get additional support for my kiddo? You know, something's going on with my kiddo. I'm not quite sure if this is typical or if it's something that needs additional attention. I feel like it's similar to that conversation we have where our kid has the sniffles. When our kid has the sniffles and we're wondering, like, do we take him to the pediatrician? Do we not? Except on a bigger scale. So I wanted to talk today about sort of how do we know or figure out if we need to seek additional support for our children, and then where do we go to get that support? So here's sort of a list of some things that you can use as guideposts for helping you determine whether to reach out and get additional support for your kiddo. So for our younger age kiddos, this would include those developmental milestones. And these are the things that you're going over with your pediatrician when you're taking your kid in for their annual checkups. And, you know, at our younger ages, we're taking them in for more frequent checkups. And that really is the purpose, is to be monitoring these milestones. Some other things that we can be observing are things like behavior. If your kiddo is having any sort of like atypical sensory responses, so like the idea of sensory sensitivities, being over or understimulated by sensory things is like a whole, like that's a whole thing that some kiddos need additional support from like an occupational therapist. Trauma, which I'll talk about in a second, but trauma can lead to some developmental concerns. Physical ailments. One of the reasons why I highlight this is I'm always surprised by how many of the students I'm helping are experiencing some level of anxiety, right? Anxiety is normal, but heightened anxiety can cause a host of problems. And for our younger kids, they don't know what anxiety is, what it feels like, how to talk about it. And a lot of times we see it manifest with physical ailments like stomach aches. The other things that we look at are social interactions, if they're struggling grade-wise. So here, when we get into our school-age kiddos, one of the guideposts we as parents can use is their grades, right? Like, what do their grades look like in the classroom? What does their standardized testing look like? And is that raising an alarm bell for you? If you begin to see some shifts in your child's behavior, like their attitude towards school is changing, that can be indicative of something that's going on with them. I like to include disorganized, like
I guess salmon
attention and hyperactivity, because I think we are talking more and more these days about executive functioning and things like ADD and ADHD, and that can manifest with things like disorganization, attention, hyperactivity. And then the last thing, I just want to empower you guys to like work off of your parental instinct, right? So we're all human beings. And I think that we can get that knot in our gut. And when we do, it's always helpful to just start asking questions. So I think it's important for me to clarify that, of course, I'm an attorney and not a clinician. So a lot of this I sort of know by way of helping of the various clients I've helped over the time. But these, for what I'm offering to you all, is these variables as guideposts that could trigger you to go seek additional help. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So I said I would revisit trauma. I like to highlight this when I'm talking with family groups, just because I feel like this is something that people don't always feel like they know how to approach the topic of trauma. Some school teams, doctors, professionals are better, and some are maybe not as oriented with trauma and how it can impact children. So I just wanted to sort of briefly touch on trauma so that you know that this is something you can look into more. So one way that we can articulate trauma for the purposes of assessing and figuring out how to support our children is through something called ACE scores. And ACE scores are adverse childhood experiences. And what we essentially do is sort of look at what this child has been through, and we develop a score based on how many different ACE variables pop for that kiddo. So this slide shows experiences versus environmental aspects. These are the variables that could lead to an ACE score. And I will say that the last time I researched this, I think there were some additional variables that they were considering adding to this list. So I think this is something that ebbs and flows a little bit. So for example, things like physical and emotional abuse and neglect, those are things that a child can directly experience that would add to an ACE score. So if a child has experienced physical abuse, that would give them a 1 for that experience. And emotional neglect would then add to 2. And we're gonna have a guest. Sorry, guys. Hey, buddy. Mom is actually in a meeting. Okay, guys, pardon the interruption. Sorry. Um, okay, all right. So I apologize for that. You just got to meet my ADHD kiddo. So listen, he handled that really well. So let me go back to our slide on trauma, and we will continue. I appreciate your patience with this. Okay, so okay. As I was saying, these experiences and environmental aspects can add up to an ACE score. Environmental aspects are something that a child's maybe not directly experiencing, but is happening in their environment. And I find this to be helpful when my audience understands ACE scores. If I'm in a school meeting where the school psychologist is familiar with ACE scores, it just helps us articulate trauma without having to dive into the details. And gives us something tangible to talk about something that's really intangible. The point for today's presentation is that kiddos that have experienced some degree of trauma, it can impact them and lead to some such sort of need in the future. So I think it's helpful for parents and guardians to just have that have awareness. Okay, and now where can we start to go and ask questions when we're beginning to notice something going on with our kiddos? Of course, our front line is always our pediatrician, and they are a wealth of knowledge. I think you can think of a pediatrician as someone that treats your kiddo for sniffles, but also someone that can connect you with additional resources. So being empowered to ask your pediatrician for referrals and for resources is always something I want parents to do when they have questions. therapists. And so this is therapists for like mental health concerns, but also occupational therapists, physical therapists. If you have a kiddo, for example, with sensory, they may go see an occupational therapist to help with sensory needs. Help Me Grow is a really important resource for our kids in the 0 to 5 age range. So kiddos that are beginning to maybe aren't getting traction on certain developmental milestones can be referred to Help Me Grow. And then Help Me Grow is run through the county, and they can assess your children to see if they qualify for Help Me Grow. And then there's a variety of resources that they can provide to assist. So Help Me Grow is a really great resource for kiddos in the 0 to 5 age range that may have some sort of developmental delay. And then our school is a valuable resource for understanding our kiddos. I think it's important to keep in mind that during the school year, our kids actually spend more time with their teachers and school staff than they do with us Monday through Friday. So they can be a wealth of knowledge about our kiddos. How are our kids interacting with their peers? And how are they doing on assignments? So not just academics, but also sort of how are they doing social emotionally? And helping you understand things like their standardized test score and what that really means, right? When you get that number on that paper, give me some context around that. So I think our teachers and other staff like the counselor and school psychologist can be helpful. Some additional resources, and listen, there are actually like a lot of state and county level resources out there. But two I wanted to highlight is the County Board of Developmental Disabilities. This is an organization that can support people with developmental disabilities in all age ranges. And then Ohio Children and Families First Council, I like highlighting this one because this organization was essentially created by the state to help families that are coordinating with multiple agencies. And really this becomes like a central hub for those different agencies that they're coordinating with. And just to show you, we'll take a quick pop out. So this is the Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disabilities. I think this is a really nice visual of the various age ranges that they can support. So if you have a kiddo that may qualify for the County Board of Developmental Disabilities, they have an application online, and that will kick off the process for you. All right, so let's talk specifically about school. That's where I spend most of my time advocating. So school-based supports for kiddos in the starting at age 3. If you have a kiddo that has been participating in Help Me Grow, which is that early intervention service program for kiddos 0 to 5, they can start getting services, but once they turn age 3, they're going to be evaluated to see if they qualify for an IEP and if they can get some level of support through that, either in a district preschool or maybe some in-home supports. So that is sort of what happens in that preschool landscape. And then when they approach kindergarten, they will transition them if they're on an IEP from the preschool-based IEP to an elementary school-based IEP. So when we're talking about the various supports that you can get in the school setting, there are kind of 3 classifications that I use. The first is interventions, and then the second and third are these more formalized supports in the form of Section 504 plans and IEPs or Individualized Education Programs. So to talk a little bit more about tiered interventions, I think this is probably where things can get a little murky for families. Like, how is my kid being educated throughout the school day when it comes to a subject that they're struggling with? So I think a really good example for the purposes of this discussion are reading improvement plans. There's the 3rd grade reading guarantee. So there is a heavy focus in elementary school around reading and providing interventions for reading. And so interventions are typically talked about in a tiered fashion, in that there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 interventions. Tier 1 interventions, these are universal, sort of more school and class-wide interventions. So students may be identified through screenings, and if they are struggling with a subject area, they may be paired into kind of a small group to begin working on some short-term interventions. The interventions are all of these interventions are typically meant to catch a student up, right? So tier 1 interventions. Then tier 2 interventions, it would be a smaller subset of students that are having more challenges in a subject area, and they could be pulled out for small group instruction and targeted with individualized strategies. So this is a lot of those students that you would see pulled out for like a reading improvement plan small group to help sort of close a knowledge gap in reading. And again, it's meant to be a short-term intervention. Now there's the tier 3, and this can sometimes happen when a student has been working in tier 2 and still needs more support. They may be bumped up to a tier 3 intervention. And so this would look like an even smaller group. So maybe if there are 8 kids in the tier 2 intervention, there's 3 or 4 kids in the tier 3 intervention. And the frequency in which those groups meet will be higher. So you're likely going to see more of a daily 1-to-1 intervention. The other thing I think is helpful to know is that interventions can be delivered in a pullout, but you can also support students in the classroom. There is value to keeping a student in the classroom so they're not missing instruction. And so, a lot of teachers can use differentiation to help support students in the classroom. So this might look like when all the students get classwork, your student may get slightly adapted classwork that targets an area where they need more support, where they need to sort of reinforce, like I'm not a teacher, but like a spelling pattern or something that they're working on. Okay, so those are the more informal interventions. That brings us to 504 and IEPs, which are more formalized interventions that are rooted in federal law. So this is just a quick snapshot of the difference between 504 and IEPs. First, sorry guys, let me get back to my slide. So the first thing to know is that IEPs are governed by the Individuals with Disabilities Act, whereas 504 plans are governed by the Rehabilitation Act. One of the main differences here is that IEPs are for kids that through high school, but once you're okay, guys, sorry. When you live in 100-year-old houses, you don't always have locks on doors. So anyways, one of the main different things to know about this is that the supports, the IEPs derived from the IDEA are really only available until a student graduates from high school, whereas Section 504 rights exist throughout your life. So when you move into the workforce or college, for example, supports under the Rehabilitation Act still exist. Another thing to look at here is the difference between eligibility. So in some of our other presentations, we dive into eligibility much deeper. Here, I'm just going to give you the high points. But to be eligible for an IEP, your student will go through an assessment process, which we'll talk about in a minute. And at the end of that, we will ask 3 questions. Does that student have one of 13 disabilities? And actually, I would probably say there's 14 disabilities, because now we are, the category of developmental delay extends until age 10 now. And number 2, does that disability significantly impact them in the education setting? So they're looking at the disability specifically in the education setting, such that it requires specially designed instruction. For Section 504, the criteria is not as difficult to meet. The question is, does the student have a disability that significantly impacts a major life function that needs additional support in the school setting? All right, so just looking at the IEP process, it begins with a parent request. So when you're embarking on this and you feel like, your student has a disability and you really think it's impacting them at school, you can reach out to the school and ask them to evaluate your student for an IEP. We always recommend that that is done in writing, because once you make that request, it sets off this process that is dictated by the law. So there are certain responses that the school district needs to provide, and they have to be provided within a certain amount of days per the law. So it's always good to send that request in writing, so it's very clear which day you made the request. And I typically say you can send that request to the principal. If there's like a vice principal, you can copy them, and the teacher. Once you send that request in, the district has 30 days to respond, meaning that they have 30 days to say they either agree that the student may have a disability, or they disagree. That is done through a meeting that is sometimes called like a suspicion meeting, but they will have a meeting with you and the school team. And during that meeting, they will determine whether the student has whether they suspect the student has a disability that is impacting them in the school setting. So I think the really important variable here is that the question is, does the team suspect that there is a disability that's impacting them at school? Sometimes this conversation sounds more like, does the team think they have a disability? And that is not the question. The question is not whether the student has a disability, it's whether they suspect the student has a disability. So just making sure that we're not looking at it in a very definitive, does the student have a disability? No, the question should be, do we suspect they have a disability? And if the answer to that question is yes, we move to the next step. If the answer to that question is no, then they will not move forward to the IEP process, and they will provide you with something called a PRO1, or a prior written notice, that will outline your request and why the district decided not to move forward with assessments. So if they decide to move forward with assessments, you will have a planning meeting where you will go through a list of areas that they can assess, and whether they will be assessing in that area and who will be conducting those assessments. So there's typically a psychoeducational assessment done by the school psychologist, and then you can add additional assessments depending on that student's specific needs, such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language assessments. And then once you complete that planning meeting, the district has 60 days to complete what's called an ETR, or an evaluation team report. So this is the report of assessments that the team will use to determine whether they qualify for an IEP. So once those assessments are complete, they will have an eligibility meeting where they will review the contents of the ETR and then ask those eligibility questions that we talked about on the previous slide. And if they determine that the student does qualify for an IEP, they have 30 days to draft and implement an IEP. That draft IEP will be reviewed in an IEP team meeting with you there. So it's important to know that at each stage of this process, you are part of the team. And you have a voice on that team, right? Like they should be asking for and considering parent input. You can also bring information from the pediatrician if they're seeing any therapists privately, like an occupational therapist. If you already have like someone involved, like a psychologist working with your student, you can bring that information to the process and have it incorporated into the evaluation team report. They are required to review that information and consider it. So that is something that, again, is a way that you exercise your voice as a parent. Once an IEP is implemented, that IEP needs to be updated every year. And they need to discuss reevaluation with reassessments every 3 years. And then here's some examples of the various supports that you can get through something like an IEP. Accommodations are also provided under a 504. So that's important to know that the stuff there on the left can be provided both in an IEP or a 504. So for example, if you have a student that might struggle with retention for some reason, something that came through on their learning profile shows that they need frequent, like multiple exposures to content to really retain, you might have something like a pre-teach accommodation where they get the materials in advance. If you have a student that for some reason struggles with completing assignments, maybe from heightened anxiety or other variables, but they seem to do pretty well with getting the content, you might look at something like shortened assignments. Extra cues and prompts are really great for kids that get easily distracted. So those would be our kiddos with like executive functioning needs. Chunking assignments also helps a kiddo with executive function needs begin to break down larger assignments into chunks and then begin to learn how to manage through assignments. Visual schedules, breaks, and movement breaks. Like this is something we talk about a lot too. Students that need breaks so that they can get ahead of dysregulated moments. So there's a lot of reasons why you may or may not use breaks for a student. And I think some good pointers on breaks are these breaks that a student asks for, or are these scheduled breaks? And that really just depends on the student and how strong their self-advocacy skills are. And then what do they do during that break? Are they going to a quiet space? Are they a student that really just needs quiet space to decompress? Or some of my students actually need like a movement-based break to effectively decompress. Related services is another part of the IEP, and this is where you would include things like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech. There's 2 different ways to deliver a related service. A direct service is when they're meeting with the student on some regular basis. And then a consultative service is when that occupational therapist or physical therapist is providing consultative advice to the teacher in how to support them in the classroom. And then modifications would be like modifications to the curriculum or assignments. So those are like the various supports that you can see delivered through an IEP. And again, the accommodations can also be delivered through a 504. And then from here, I will turn it over to Kristen with Disability Rights Ohio to dive a little more into supporting your school-age child. So Kristen, I'm going to stop sharing. And I think I can hand it off to you. Just give me 1 second.
No, I'm online. I'll take you. I'm listening to a webinar. I'm about to watch it.
Paula, if you could mute, that would be helpful.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
No apologies necessary. I've already had a kid come in twice, so we're all living our lives here in the evening. Kristen, I think you have control now.
Okay. All right. Does that look good?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I thought I would start by discussing some ways that parents can advocate for their kids and some of the things that you should be looking at to have the best chance of resolving whatever problem it is you're having with services for your child. And I think an important first step is to try to figure out what kind of problem that you're having, because I think you can sort of put problems in categories, and depending on what category it's in, there are ways that are more likely to resolve that kind of problem than other ways. So you want to identify what kind of problem it is. And this slide just gives you some examples of some of the categories of problems that we see in school. And the first category is attitudinal problems. And so in the work that I do, we encounter this a lot, and the types of attitudinal problems that parents see are maybe there's somebody that has low expectations for your child, somebody on the team, their expectations don't meet the high expectations that you have for your child. Maybe there's a lack of understanding about the disability. Another thing that we see a lot in my practice um, is people on the team not acknowledging that a child has disability related behaviors, but maybe might put them in the category of a child that just is acting out, for example. And so if you are experiencing a problem that's really about attitudes about the adults, then often the best way to resolve that kind of problem is by asking for training and support for the staff that are working with your child, right? There really is no way to change somebody's attitude through a complaint or legal means. The best way really to do that is to offer that person as much support as possible, and training in the hopes that they will have a better understanding about what's going on with your child. Another category of problems that we see are structural problems, and that might be where you have a child with a physical disability and the building they're in is not accessible, or the work is not accessible to them because of the way it's being offered to them doesn't work for their disability. So those kinds of structural problems with either the physical building or the way in which the educational program is structured, the best way generally to address those problems is to change the problem with the structure. So if it's a physical problem in the building, the building can be made accessible, or the classroom can be moved to a different location, that kind of a thing. If it's a change with the way the child's being able to access the instruction that they're being provided, then we can try to change that. And that's what special education is all about. And that is modifying the way in which we are instructing kids to meet the needs they have because of their disability. And then another category is educational or organizational problems. It might be that there's a lack of appropriate services being provided to the child. Maybe there's a lack of data collection and it's difficult for the team to figure out if the child is making progress. Generally speaking, the best way to try to resolve that kind of a problem is to ask for an IEP meeting, get the IEP team involved to talk about what can be done to add additional services and supports to the IEP. How can we collect data to make sure that we know what's happening with that particular child? These are just examples. There are obviously other categories, but the point is for you to think about this and then use the best tactic to try to get your problem resolved. You don't want to go overboard in advocacy. You don't want to use advocacy that's not going to be effective and not going to get you what you want. So think about what type of the problem it is and try to begin your advocacy, as suggested by this slide. The other thing that you can do to be an effective advocate is that you can learn advocacy skills. There's a lot of helpful resources on the internet about advocacy skills on our website, and there's a link there. We have a really great publication called Negotiation Skills for Parents, and it guides parents through pretty much through the whole special education process, and it gives tips and tricks for negotiating with a school district to get the best results for your child throughout the entire process. And this is not like a legally complex booklet. It's really all about effective advocacy strategies. Who do you call when you have a problem? What is the best way to communicate with people? How do you overcome barriers when you're in IEP meetings, those kinds of things. So I encourage you to look at that booklet and read it. And I think you'll probably find something in there that's helpful to you as you're advocating for your child during their educational career. You also might be at a point where you need to seek support. So you want to know what the options are for supports out there in Ohio. And this slide addresses some of them. Of course, Disability Rights Ohio, where I work, is an organization that provides support for families in the special education process. Our services are free, and we have a small team of people who help families with IEP meetings and other aspects of working through the special education process. We also have the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities. That's our state parent training and information center. It's a federally funded organization, and it also helps families through the special education process. They also put out a lot of helpful information to parents about special education issues, and I encourage you to get on their website and sign up for their email blasts so that you have all the information that you need to advocate for your child. There are also remedies that are available to you through the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. You recently changed names to the Ohio Education and Workforce. Prior, it was just the process. They offer mediation, where they will send a mediator to your IEP meeting or just a mediation meeting to also do the same thing, to try to help the parties work through a problem and come up with a resolution. And then they have more sort of formal remedies available, like a state complaint, where the department will investigate your concerns, and then due process hearings, which are the most formal way to try to resolve disputes. Your school district might have a parent mentor. You should look into that. And those are people who will be of support to you as you advocate for your child. So look to see if you have those available in your district. Not all districts have them, but yours might. And then also there are private attorneys in our state that also represent families. And our office maintains a list of some of those attorneys. So if you would ever need that, you can contact us for that. But it's important to educate yourself about what supports are available in the state in case you get to that point where you need someone to help you. You should also spend some time looking on the internet for resources, because there are a lot of really good resources out there about special education and parent advocacy. So I encourage you to do that. Our website has also information about special education issues and topics, and sort of frequently asked questions, documents, and sample letters, and things that you might be able to use in your advocacy. You should talk with other parents if you can find them in your district who are having the same kinds of issues or trying to advocate for their kids. That can often be a very powerful thing when parents get together and talk to each other about how they've been successful in advocating for their children and how they've resolved their issues. Certainly you can contact those advocacy organizations I talked to you about. You can contact state agencies that might be able to help you. You should think about joining a parent group if there's one available in your area, or even starting one, because again, talking to families who've been through this and have resolved their concerns successfully can be a wealth of information. So that's always a good thing to do. And then if you have the time and the inclination, joining committees that help the state agencies and other organizations that determine educational policy is a great thing for a parent to do. It's a great way to learn. It's also a great way for you to have a voice in some of the policy that's set by the various agencies that serve kids with disabilities. I want to now talk to you a little bit about some of the common issues that we see. These are not all of the issues. We don't have time to go through all of them, but just to highlight some of the more common concerns that parents call us about, just to give you a little idea about those issues and how you might go about trying to get help for your child if your child is encountering those same kinds of issues. So the first thing I want to talk about is behavior. It's probably the largest percentage of calls that come into our office. Parents will call because their child has a disability that has behaviors associated with it, and the school is struggling to support the child, and the child is getting suspended from school or sent home early or expelled or whatever it is. It's a very common call to our office. So it's important to know how you might go about asking for support for your child if they're having behavioral issues in school and it's causing a disruption in their day. So it's important to know that behavior comes in many forms. It doesn't always look the same. It can be a variety of different things. Refusing to do work is considered a behavior. Physical aggression and verbal aggression, of course, those we see a lot. Refusing to go to school is a behavior. Kids can have inappropriate social interactions. They can elope. They can leave the classroom or whatever area they're in when they're not supposed to. This is just a sample list. Behaviors span a broad continuum, and so they look different generally for every child. But there's one thing that's in common that they all have in common, and that is they're all a form of a communication. And a child, when they're engaging in a behavior in the educational setting, is trying to communicate something. And in order to really address that behavior and support that behavior, we have to know what it is that child is trying to communicate to us. There's a process in special education set out specifically to do that. And it's important that you ask for that process to happen if you have a child who is having behaviors in school and it's interfering with their learning. So we need to determine the function of behavior in order to appropriately address it. And the function really is what it's getting for that child. So when that child engages in a behavior, they're communicating something, mostly that they don't like whatever is happening. And the behavior is a way to get what out of that situation, or to get attention if that's what they're seeking. It's different for every child, but when we know what that child is trying to get from that behavior, then we can figure out a way to respond to that behavior that gets that child what they need and diminishes their need to engage in that behavior. That is typically done through something called a functional behavioral assessment. And that is a process that is used in special education to assess behavior and determine the function. Generally, it is a process. It's not just a test or an assessment that's done, but it is usually a process that happens over time, where multiple people will observe the child in the various settings in school, and especially in the settings where they're having their behaviors, and then try to determine, based on the observation, why that child is engaging that behavior and what the function of it is, what it's getting for that child. When a functional behavioral assessment is done well, it should come up with a hypothesis about what the function of the behavior is and help a team determine how they're going to address that behavior through the use of positive interventions and supports. So once that FBA or functional behavioral assessment is done, then the team creates a behavior intervention plan. And there's some things that you want to know about what makes a good behavior intervention plan. Again, it would be different for every child, but there are some things that are universal, and they are that it should be a positive plan and not punitive. The point of appropriate behavior interventions in the special education arena is to provide positive supports that support a child in changing their behavior to a behavior that is getting them what they want but acceptable in the educational environment. So positive, not punitive. Every behavior plan should contain a teaching component. So we don't want to put a plan together that is just kind of wishful thinking or hoping that a child will change the way that they're behaving. We need to teach that child more appropriate ways of behaving, more appropriate ways of getting what they need in order to be successful in school. So there has to be some aspect of it that teaches that child a different behavior to replace the one that we don't want to see. And if a behavior plan doesn't have that, it's most likely not going to be successful. All staff need to know their role in implementing the behavior, and it's incredibly important because it needs to be consistently implemented throughout the environments in school, right? So it's rare that a child only has a behavior in one place in the school. Generally, it will translate to other places. A lot of kids have behaviors during transition periods when they're moving from one place to another. So everybody who encounters that child, every adult that encounters that child in the educational environment needs to know what that plan is, and they need to implement it. They all need to implement it. So all staff should know their role in that behavior plan. Another critical component of all behavior plans is data collection. So data needs to be collected about whether or not the plan is working, if the child is responding to the interventions that are in the plan. And the only way to know if it's working or not is to collect that data. And if we collect data and it says it's not working, or we can identify a problem about that plan, we can use that data to modify that plan and change it and update it. So very important that is part of the behavior plan, and actually all aspects of special education, and we'll talk about that as well. So if your child's having behavior in school, what I recommend is you talk to the school staff. If there's again, if it's a particular person that the child's having behavior with, the first step would be to sort of talk to that person, see if it's a simple fix. And if that doesn't work, then I ask for an IEP meeting, get the team together, review the data that's collected about a behavior plan, see if it is or isn't working, or if you can figure that out. Another thing to do is consider additional supports in the classroom or the building. So for some children, they might need a change in their schedule, or they might need additional adult support, or they might need a better way to communicate and some assistive technology, and we'll talk about that later. But we want to look at, are there additional supports and services that we can put in place? If you don't already have a behavior plan, ask for that functional behavioral assessment, get a plan developed, make sure data is collected. And then another good tip is that you want to meet periodically after that behavior plan is put in place to review data, make sure it's working. And if it's not working, modify it, because what you don't want is for a plan to be put in place and to wait an entire year and realize that it's really not working. When you could have had that meeting early, modified the plan, and the child would have more successful. So you can build in periodic meetings. When you're meeting with the team to develop the plan, you can just agree upon a time that you're going to meet again and to review the progress. Another issue we see a lot is that of assistive technology. This is something that's in our special education law, the IDEA, and it's something that should be discussed for every child with a disability. And assistive technology is technology. It can be simpler, it can be complex. It's basically anything. It might be equipment, software, some kind of a system, anything that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a child with a disability. Again, it should be discussed by every IEP team. There's a place on the IEP form for that to be discussed. And if it's necessary for a child, it needs to be provided by the school and documented on the IEP. This includes both the actual item or device, whatever it is, and also services to support the choice of what AT is going to be provided, and also the use of AT. So there are assessments that can be done to determine what assistive technology a child might need. And if there are multiple versions of the particular assistive technology, which one would be the most effective for that child? So there are those assessments. And then once the child gets the assistive technology, there's often like upkeep, there might be programming, there might be other things that need to happen. The child might need to be taught how to use the assistive technology. So it's not just getting the device, but it's the supportive services around that device, and the child's accessing that device, and the staff accessing the device if they need to. That has to be provided. AT is important because it can help a child in a variety of different ways. It can help a child access educational content. So for example, if you have a child who's visually impaired, there's all sorts of technology that helps kids who are visually impaired read text or listen to text. So it can help in that regard. And it can help a variety of other kids who are hearing impaired. There's lots of assistive technology that can help them. It can help them participate in class. So if you have a child that's, for example, has a hard time communicating verbally, they might have a piece of technology that can help them communicate with the teacher and their classmates. If it's a physical assist kind of thing, it can help kids get around and access the school building. And then it can also help kids demonstrate what they know. We in our office represented a student once who was nonverbal, who was getting into a lot of trouble at school and was kicked out multiple times. We helped the team make the decision to assess this student for assistive technology. They did that. They provided her with a tablet that had voice output, and she was able to communicate by typing into this tablet, and it would speak for her. Once they determined that she needed this assistive technology and she started using it, her behaviors went away. She was able to stay in school and graduate. She now is a nationally known speaker and is competitively employed in a very cool job, and has met the president and spoken to a lot of people in Washington, D.C. So that simple decision to find a way for her to communicate completely changed her life. And it was amazing to see. So this is an important thing to think about. If you have a child who's having issues accessing the program or communicating with peers, maybe assistive technology can help. Here's just some examples. Honestly, it can be anything as simple as one of those little rubber grips that you put on a pencil so a kid can hold onto that pencil better, to expensive computers that speak for students who are nonverbal. So really, it can be anything. Okay, if a child is eligible for AT, it should be listed in the IEP. Not only what AT is going to be used, but where it will be used, how it will be used to help the child, and any other kind of information that's needed for staff to help the child implement the use of that AT. Another thing to know is that AT can be taken home if necessary. When a child gets AT that's provided by the school district, this isn't something that's paid for by the school. It's technically the property of the school district. And when the student leaves, they don't take that AT with them. I mean, when they graduate, they don't take it with them. But if they need to access that AT on a daily basis, they can take it home. For example, if they need it to do their homework, then they would be able to take that home, and then they would just bring it back and forth each day. All right, another thing we commonly see is parents who call us saying, my school is not following my child's IEP. So some things that you can do if that's an issue that you're having is to first make sure you know what the IEP says. It's sometimes surprising to me that parents and also people in the school don't exactly know what the IEP says. So the first step is to make sure you have a copy of the IEP, you really understand what it says, and that you know what's on it. You also want to make sure that everyone who's working with the child has a copy of the IEP. This is another thing that we see often, particularly for kids who might be in a resource room, a special ed room, like 1 or 2 periods a day, and then they go out around the school to other classrooms. Sometimes the other teachers don't have a copy of the IEP, even though they would be required to implement some of the accommodations or modifications, for example. So make sure everyone has a copy of that IEP. You want to speak to the person who's responsible for the service that's not being provided. That would be the first step I would recommend. So if for example, you don't think the teacher is working on a particular goal, the first thing to do is to contact that teacher and find out what's going on and see what the issue is and how to resolve it. If it doesn't get resolved by talking to the person responsible for the service, then parents should ask for an IEP meeting, get everybody together and talk about what's happening. Maybe it is being implemented, but it's not being documented. But you want to ask for an IEP meeting and discuss it with everybody and find out what's going on. Find out what the resolution is to making sure that IEP is followed. You can also ask for any necessary professional development or training for staff. So maybe it's an issue of somebody not knowing how to implement it. Going back to the assistive technology issue, if a child has new assistive technology, maybe the staff have not been trained in supporting the use of that AT. That would be the time to ask for that training or professional development to happen. Also, it might be that something has come up that makes it difficult for that particular part of the IEP to be implemented. So you want to discuss, are there alternate ways to provide the service? Sometimes, staff who are responsible are out for some reason. They might be out for a health condition or who knows why they're out. Maybe somebody else can provide the service. But you want to discuss if it's not being provided, if there's a barrier because the staff aren't available, what are the alternate ways to get that done? You also want to ask for data about implementation. As I said earlier, data is really important throughout all of special education. It's the way that we know if something is happening or not. It's the way that we know if a child is making progress or not. So if you're concerned that the school is not implementing your child's IEP, you want to ask for data about the implementation. And that can be a variety of different things depending on what the service is that's not being provided. And then finally, there's one of the remedies in special education is something called compensatory education. And that is available to students who did not get services that were required to be provided as part of their IEP. And this happens most often in the area of related services. So if a child has, let's just say, for example, physical therapy as a related service on their IEP, and something happens, the physical therapist is gone. They're out on maternity leave, or they're out sick, or they just left and took a different job, and the school hasn't been able to find a new physical therapist. There's going to be a period of time where that child is not getting the service on their IEP, and they're entitled for that to be made up. So when the school does finally get somebody to fill that role, then they need to provide the hours that were missed to that child, in addition to the hours that they're going to continue to get according to their IEP. So remember that that's an available remedy out there, and you can ask for that if there are services on the IEP that should have been provided but were not. All right, and so then also, if you can't get your concerns resolved through what we just talked about, these different options, remember that there are those remedies available to you from the Department of Education, the facilitated IEP meeting, mediation, a state complaint, and due process. And if you ever get to this point, I would encourage you to get on the Department of Education's website. They have a lot of really good information for parents about these available remedies. And they have like complaint forms if you choose to pursue a complaint that you can fill in from online that will help you through that process. I would encourage you, if you can, to look to sort of start with the lowest level remedy, which is the facilitated IEP meeting, because it's always best to try to get things resolved at the lowest level. That's the easiest process, and will be the most efficient way to resolve something if you can. All right, and then data collection. I've touched on this already, but I just want to reiterate that it's incredibly important throughout the special education process. And it's really important at all aspects of the process. When, as Janet was talking about, the eligibility determination, it's incredibly important for all data that's available about the child and that child's potential conditions or disabilities be shared with the team. It's important when creating the IEP that the IEP is created based on data that's available through that eligibility determination process. The ETR and the evaluations that were conducted are a rich source of data, and the IEP should be looking at that data and addressing whatever priority concerns are raised by the data. So it should, there should be that connection. And also when assessing progress, we have to have data. We have to have data at the beginning about where the child is, and data throughout that child's educational career to make sure that they are indeed moving forward and making progress from the instruction. So always keep that in mind, that you're going to want to make sure that the school is collecting data so that the team has that when they are making decisions about services and supports. So you want to make sure that your child's IEP team is collecting data. There are certain kinds of data that the school has to collect to create progress reports that are sent to parents. They have to, like related services providers, have to keep data on the provision of services, and the teacher should be collecting data on your child's achievement, on their goals and objectives. But there's also another kind of data, and that is what parents can ask for. It's a more informal kind of data that can be shared with you on a regular basis, so that you are kept current on what your child is doing, and that you can feel confident that they are getting what they need on a regular basis. So this can be anything, and you might want different kinds depending on what your situation is. But I've worked with parents who have gotten daily checklists from their child's aide or teacher about how the child is doing on a particular issue. You can ask for weekly data. You can ask for like a weekly email from the teacher on a particular issue that you want data collected on. A good way that parents get sort of informal data on a regular basis is a communication notebook or log. A lot of parents have a notebook where they will write an entry about how the child did, whether they slept well or not, how they were doing in the morning. It goes with the child to school. The teacher inputs things into that log. It goes home to the parent. So the parent knows how the child did during the day. So whatever works for you, try to build something like that into your child's IEP, where you're getting data that makes you feel confident that your child is getting what they need at school. Another thing that I think is important is for parents to know that they have the right to what's called an independent educational evaluation if they disagree with an evaluation that's been conducted by the school. This is a right that's provided to parents through our federal special education law. And it essentially is the right to get what I consider to be like a second opinion. So this is available anytime the school has done an evaluation that you disagree with. So it could be the initial evaluation to determine whether your child's eligible for an IEP or not. If the school does an evaluation and says your child's not eligible and you disagree, that would be a time where you could ask for an independent evaluation. If the school district conducts that functional behavioral assessment that I was telling you about, that's the basis for the behavior plan, and you disagree with the results of that functional behavioral assessment, or you think it was very poorly done, you can ask for an independent functional behavioral assessment. And the idea behind this is to get a second opinion that provides additional information to the IEP team for them to make a decision, right? It is a right that is available free of charge to families if families follow the requirements of the school's policy on independent educational evaluations. So it's important, if you're going to pursue this, that you ask the school district for their policy and you see what it says. There are some caveats about this, though, that I want you to know about. And that is that it really does serve as a second opinion, but it's not gospel. So schools aren't required to implement the recommendations of an IEE. They have to consider it. They have to really consider it as part of the decision making in the IEP team, but they don't have to agree with it and they don't have to implement it. So, how you pursue an independent evaluation can kind of make it more or less effective, right? So it truly is independent. The school will offer parents a list of potential evaluators, but the parent doesn't have to go with that list. They can get somebody on their own who serves as this independent evaluator. But if you as a parent get somebody that the school district doesn't like or doesn't trust or doesn't think is professionally honest, it's not going to be very effective for you, because they're just going to dismiss what that person did, right? Because they don't like that person, or they have a bad opinion of that person, or whatever. So it's important, I think, to do things that will make this second opinion the most valuable for you. And there are some things you can do. You can first discuss with the IEP team what they think would be helpful in making decisions. And if you agree, try to go with an evaluator that they think would be helpful. So you can discuss it with them, try to agree on the evaluator. Another thing that can be really helpful is to ask the evaluator to come to an IEP meeting and to discuss their evaluation and help the IEP team make decisions about educational planning. And I say this because it's much easier to dismiss the results of something that's on a piece of paper than it is to dismiss a live person that's participating in the discussion. And also, when the evaluator is at the meeting, the team can ask questions of that person and maybe get additional information from them that makes them feel more comfortable with the results. So this is an excellent tool for parents, but there are strategies that you can use to make it the most effective tool for you. Then I want to talk to you also about another service and support that might be beneficial to your child, and that is extended school year. Extended school year services are special education and related services that we've been talking about that are provided to your child beyond the traditional school year, and they're usually provided during the summer. So it's a way to sort of extend the provision of services to your child during the summer or sometimes even school breaks to help them with their learning. This is another thing that needs to be considered for every student with an IEP. There's a place on the IEP that requires, on the IEP form, that requires the school IEP team to talk about it. What we've seen in our practice is that it's often checked off that the child doesn't need extended school year before there's been a really robust and thorough discussion about it. And the steps that the team should take to have the information they need to make a good decision haven't been taken. So you as a parent should be aware that this is something that your child might need, and you should keep an eye out on whether or not there's been some discussion about planning for having a real good discussion about it. Generally, extended school year is available to students who would lose skills during the 10 or so week break during the summer, and then take a long time to make up those skills during the school year. So if your child loses significant skills over the summer and it takes a long time, like, more than the first 9 weeks of school for your child to start making up those services, then they might be entitled to ESY. That standard of where they lose skills and then make them up is called regression recoupment. So if you hear that term, regression recoupment, that's what that means. Your child regresses, and then the recoupment period, or the time they gain those skills back, is too long. Not all kids with IEPs will qualify for ESY. It's truly an individualized determination based on how your child does or doesn't do over the summer. But if your child's eligible for ESY, then it has to be documented on the IEP that they need it and what services and supports will be provided. There is a way to sort of prepare for this discussion, and I want to tell you some of the tips and tricks around that. You want to make sure, again, I know I've said this a million times, that data is collected throughout the entire period of time that your child is in school, because the decision about regression and recoupment is going to be based on a review of data. So at the very beginning, when you have your IEP meeting, make sure that you've had that discussion about how is data going to be collected. If you already know that your child is going to regress over the summer because you have experienced that, and you know in particular what the regression is going to be, like they're going to lose math skills or they're going to lose behavior control, make sure data is collected on those things that you know are going to be a problem. The other thing you want to do is make sure that your IEP goals and objectives are measurable, because if they're not measurable, it's going to be really hard to figure out if your child has made progress or not on those goals and objectives. So again, something to be done when that IEP is written is to make sure they truly are written in a way that you can measure progress or no progress. You wanted to start this discussion early, and depending on when you have your annual IEP meeting, it might not be the right time. So you can ask for a specific meeting to discuss the issue of extended school year. And I suggest that you begin that request in February. You start asking your school district to start thinking about the ESY question, schedule an IEP meeting, ask the school to collect data, and start talking about it. You also can gather other sources of support. So if you have any kind of private providers that can speak to how they think your child will do, if he or she is not provided with services over a 10-week period, that can be another source of information that can be provided to the team when they're making that determination of whether the child should get services, ESY services over the summer. Also, I want you to know that ESY should be individualized. It's not the same as summer school. And so schools can't say, well, we have this summer school program that will serve as ESY. ESY really needs to be individualized based on the needs of the child's disability. And so a school can't have a one-size-fits-all program. They can't say, we have this 5-week program over here that we give for ESY. That doesn't comply with the requirements of the law. They also can't provide ESY only to certain students. So they can't say, well, we only provide it to kids with autism, or we only provide it to kids, with serious behavior issues. It really has to be provided to any child who qualifies for it. And if a child needs related services as part of an extended school year, like they need PT, OT, or speech, those should be provided as well. All right, and then I think this may be towards the end of my slides. I know that Janet already talked about some sources of support, but I just want to go over a few more. Janet talked about the County Board of Developmental Disabilities. They can attend IEP meetings with you. They can also help you find resources. So they may be a source of support to you. Just quickly, if your child is Medicaid eligible, there is a child Medicaid program called EPSDT that may allow you to access additional Medicaid services like OT, PT, and speech, for example. And then if you have a child who has some complex behavioral health issues and multi-systems needs, like the Family and Children First types of services, we do have a program in Ohio called Ohio Rise that provides specialized managed care for kids with those kinds of needs. So that may be something also that you might want to look into. All right. Are there any questions?
So in the chat, we do have one question regarding the slides. So after today's presentation, everyone who registered will get a follow-up email that should include a link to the presentation as well as a copy of the slides. So that will be provided. And do we have any other questions? We covered a lot of ground today, so. Okay, well, I just wanted to piggyback on a couple of things that Kristen mentioned. I could talk about these scenarios for days and days, but I wanted to point out, Kristen talked about like the various resources that you can utilize to help support you. One thing that I tell parents is, if you can't afford to hire someone like myself or Mary Jo, sometimes it's as simple as bringing a friend to a meeting. So sometimes we don't have time in our lives, as you can see with my kiddo jumping in here, to overcomplicate things. So I always encourage people to bring another person to the meeting, whether it's a friend, an advocate, someone that you've connected with through the various resources we've discussed, because these are our kiddos. And these meetings can be emotional, and it includes a lot of information that we don't talk about in our everyday lives, a lot of acronyms or specialized terms that, someone who doesn't do this every day is not familiar with. So simply having a friend there that can be a second set of ears that you can talk to afterwards and say, did you understand what they said? Did you catch that? Maybe they catch something that you didn't catch. Can be just a really valuable resource. I also think that these meetings can be intimidating because a school team is several people and parents are one or two. So having someone there can just help you feel more comfortable and empowered to voice your concerns and provide your feedback. So I think sometimes we may not have the time to make that call, but we can call a friend and say, hey, can you come to this meeting with me? So I think that's a really important tool. I think, let me just double check the chat to make sure. I don't see any other questions. And if anyone, I'll just give you guys one more second and I'll ramble on for a minute. But the other thing I like to tell parents about advocacy is that collaboration is a really important aspect of advocacy. So being a strong advocate is important, but also being part of the process, and to the extent that we can, being, respectful, collaborative participants is really important. When we do have cases that rise to the level of due process, oftentimes districts will utilize sort of lack of cooperation from the family as part of their defense. So that's like sort of a very legalese reason why we want to be collaborative. But in a more, everyday aspect, it's just helpful to always maintain a great relationship with your school team. And we know these are challenging, difficult conversations sometimes, but a collaborative tone is always very helpful. And to that end, I should share that one of the things that Mary Jo and I often discuss with our clients is that hiring an attorney can sometimes come with a preconceived notion of what we're going to do in a meeting. And sometimes I will even have families say, hey, we're really worried about bringing you in because we don't want the district or the school team to get their guard up and to be really sort of defensive because you're in the room. And that is kind of a natural inclination when you're engaging an attorney. But I like to tell people that my approach and my tone is not a table pounding sort of fire and brimstone attorney approach. One of the reasons why I love this area of practice is I don't have to be that person most of the time. Really, I come in as a team partner, a collaborator, someone that's there to sort of make sure that we're all doing the things that we should be doing, right? But not in a aggressive way, unless we really get to a place where we need to be more firm. So I like to let people know that it can take some of the intimidation out of approaching an attorney or an advocate if you know that they're using that sort of tone in your meetings. And I know that when my work is done, you have to continue to live with this school district and school team for years, potentially. So I'm not going in there and burning bridges. Mary Jo has a very, very similar approach. And that I think is an important quality in someone that's going to be on your advocacy team.
We have one question that
Yeah.
came in. Paula, if schools are changed throughout year, should the same IEP be followed? If it's a school building change within a district, yes. If they change to a different district, the IEP should be followed until the new school district does some evaluation and decides to change it. So they should implement a very, very similar IEP until they've had a chance to look at it and make changes they want to propose.
And essentially, if you're shifting school districts, you're entering into the transfer IEP process. And so the school district has a certain amount of time to review the underlying ETR and IEP and determine if they're going to make modifications to the existing IEP, or if for some reason, and this is kind of rare, they want to do additional assessments or revisit the ETR. But the intention, I think, of the law is to make that process as streamlined as possible so that there are no gaps in the supports and services that your student is receiving. All right. So barring any additional questions, that's all we have for you guys. And I think we probably got a lot in. We are always here if you guys have follow-up questions. Kristen, you have been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, you're welcome.
We really appreciate having you. I think Kristen returns for another webinar later this year.
Somebody on my team does, because I will be out of the country. So
that's great. Lucky Kristen.
Emily Durrell from our team will do the next one, and she's great.
Yeah, so I think you guys are involved in our transition. Is it the transition
Yeah.
one? So
Yeah.
we will have a transition planning webinar later in the school year that will be focused on that transition from high school to post-secondary life. So everyone have a wonderful evening and stay warm.
Bye.